I had just gotten out of work at 11 p.m. and was heading back to my house. It was about a 45-minute drive, as I lived several miles outside of the city. The further I got from town, the quieter the roads became. I always enjoyed these late-night drives. They were peaceful, a chance to unwind after a long day. I was about 20 minutes from home when I turned onto a long side road that led directly there. It was my usual route, one I had taken for years without any incidents. Still, I had to admit, it was a bit eerie at night. The road was dimly lit, flanked by dense forest on both sides. Fog often rolled in during the later hours, limiting visibility to just a few feet ahead. But with no intersections or turns, navigating it was never too difficult. A few minutes down the road, I noticed a small blinking light through the fog. It was hard to tell how far ahead it was, or even what side of the road it was on. As I slowed down to get a better look, the light suddenly went out. My speed dropped to about 15 to 20 miles per hour when, out of nowhere, a small car pulled onto the road right in front of me and stopped abruptly. I hit the brakes, but I was too close. I lightly tapped their rear bumper. The suddenness of it all left me in shock, but when I glanced at both cars, there didn't seem to be much damage. Unsure of what to do, I stepped out and stood beside my car, waiting for the other driver. Through the windshield, I saw movement in the front seat, but I couldn't tell what they were doing. As I observed the car, I noticed how old and worn it looked. Strangely, the headlights weren't on. After what felt like an eternity, a man slowly stepped out. He was middle-aged, large, and moved toward me with an odd, shifty demeanor. He never made eye contact, instead looking around as if searching for something. Trying to break the tension, I asked, "Is everything okay? You pulled out pretty quick." He hesitated before muttering, "Yeah, sorry." His behavior made me uneasy. Something felt off. I didn't want to stand there alone on an empty road any longer than necessary. I told him there was no real damage and that I was going to head home. As I reached for my car door, his voice stopped me. "Wait," he said, "I need to check my car first." I sighed and stayed put as he walked to the back bumper, but instead of examining it, he began slowly circling the vehicle, pretending to inspect it. This made no sense. I had barely tapped the back of his car, so why was he checking the passenger side? That's when I saw it. A shadow moved inside his car. A large figure in the back seat sat up and reached for the door handle. Panic surged through me. I jumped into my car and locked the doors just as the backseat passenger stepped out. Both men began waving their hands, shouting at me to stop. I didn't hesitate. I slammed the car into drive and swerved around them, speeding down the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw their headlights flicker on through the thick fog. They followed me for a few moments before their lights faded into the distance. Still shaken, I pulled into a gas station about 5 minutes from home. I waited there for 15 minutes, watching the road, making sure they hadn't followed me. When I was certain they hadn't, I finally drove home. I never called the cops. At the time, I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. Even now, I don't know what those men wanted, but every instinct told me something was very wrong. The more I think about it, the more I realize how close I may have come to real danger. And the thought that haunts me the most? If they didn't follow me, did they stay there, waiting for someone else to fall into their trap? I used to work for a small trucking company that delivered frozen products to stores across multiple states. Most of the time, I'd make 3 or 4 deliveries before heading back to the warehouse and then home. Occasionally, though, I'd have a long haul that ended too far from home to return the same day. On those nights, I'd find a truck stop, rest for a few hours, and then get back on the road. One particular night, I was scheduled for a long delivery and knew I wouldn't make it back until late the next day. The drive to the destination was uneventful. I unloaded the truck and started my return trip. By the time I was heading back, it was already around 1 a.m. Feeling the fatigue set in, I decided to stop and rest. The last sign I had seen indicated a truck stop 40 miles ahead, so I kept going, trying to stay alert. Driving long stretches at night can get monotonous, and I often found myself zoning out. But then, something flickered in my side mirror. When I glanced over, I noticed headlights right behind my trailer, but I couldn't see the car itself. That usually meant the vehicle was too close, sitting in my blind spot. Expecting them to pass, I maintained my speed, but they didn't. They just stayed there, trailing me. It started to make me uneasy. If I had to brake suddenly, this guy would crash straight into me. The truck stop was just a few miles ahead, so I tried to ignore it and focus on the road. Finally, I saw the sign for the rest area and started pulling in. As I turned, I checked my mirror again. The car slowed down slightly, but then followed me into the parking lot. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe I had accidentally cut them off earlier and they just wanted to yell at me. Angry drivers weren't unusual in this line of work, but being followed into a rest stop was a first. I parked and shifted into neutral, watching as the car crept up behind me, stopping too close for me to see it clearly. At this point, my nerves were on edge. I got out of the truck and started walking around the back, ready to confront whoever it was. But as soon as I slammed my door shut, the car suddenly reversed and sped off. I only got a glimpse, but it was an older man driving an old, rusted white sedan, one that resembled an old police car, complete with front bumper bars. I stood there for a moment, checking my truck's locks and making sure he didn't circle back. When I was satisfied that everything was secure, I climbed back in, double-checked the locks, and tried to get some rest. About 2 hours later, just past 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud bang echoing through my trailer. I checked my watch, my heart pounding. Then, another bang, this time louder. I tensed and looked in my side mirror. A faint shadow moved near the back of my truck. My stomach dropped. Gripping a small knife I kept in the middle compartment, I carefully opened my driver's door without making any noise and stepped out. As I crept toward the rear, I crouched and peeked under the trailer. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was standing pressed against the back doors, their car parked right behind them with its headlights off. A surge of fear shot through me. I decided not to get any closer. Instead, I shouted, my voice shaking slightly but firm enough to startle them. The figure spun around, bolted to their car, and sped off into the night. When I checked the back doors, my hands trembled. Scratches covered the lock with clear signs of someone trying to pry it open. The realization hit me. He had been trying to break in. I scanned the parking lot, but it was mostly empty. No witnesses, no help. After a few minutes of gathering myself, I decided I'd had enough. I got back on the road and didn't stop again until I reached home. Nothing else happened that night, but the unease lingered. To this day, I believe that man was trying to steal from my trailer, unaware that it was empty. But the thought that still haunts me, the possibility that he wasn't just after cargo. Even now, years later, I sometimes feel the paranoia creep in. That unsettling sensation that a car might be following me just beyond my sight, lurking in the darkness. I was attending a popular concert on the south side of Chicago last year. As most people know, it's a pretty sketchy area with a high crime rate, but the tickets were cheap, and the crowd was massive, so I felt safe. Plus, I had a couple of friends with me. The concert was amazing, and we had a great time, but we knew getting out would be a nightmare with all the traffic. By the time we finally made it out of the parking lot and onto the main road, it was almost 10 p.m. The cars were barely moving, and after sitting in the same spot for nearly half an hour, we started looking for alternative routes. One of my friends found a way through some neighborhood streets that could help us avoid the traffic, so we decided to take it. As soon as we turned off the main road, we noticed something strange. There were a lot of people outside, just standing around or walking in the dark. It was unusual compared to where we lived, just a couple of hours west. As we kept driving, we realized that many of these people were watching us. No one smiled, waved, or acknowledged us in a friendly way, just silent stares. Then, we noticed something even more unsettling. We hadn't seen another car in at least 20 minutes. A weird tension filled the car. I asked my friend to check the map for the nearest main road, but before he could answer, my other friend pointed ahead. At the end of the street, a car was parked sideways, blocking both lanes. I slammed the brakes. A chill ran through all of us. I quickly put the car in reverse and backed out, returning to the previous road. We drove in silence, our minds racing. Then, just a few minutes later, at the end of another road, we saw it again. Another car parked the exact same way, blocking both lanes. I stopped again, gripping the steering wheel, as my friends exchanged nervous glances. The area was too dark to see if anyone was inside. As we debated what to do, 2 men suddenly emerged from a nearby house. One stood behind the car, while the other approached my driver's side window. He motioned for me to roll it down. My gut told me not to, but I hesitantly lowered it just a few inches. The man scanned the inside of our car before asking, "Where are you headed?" "Just back to the highway," I replied, my voice tight. He nodded slightly and glanced at his friend, who was now walking toward the passenger side. A tense silence followed, an eerie moment where time seemed to slow. Then, without warning, both men lunged at the doors, yanking on the handles violently. Chaos erupted inside the car. My friend screamed as I threw the car into reverse. One of the men reached through the small gap in my window, his arm getting stuck for a split second before I jerked the car back, sending him tumbling to the ground. I didn't think, I just floored it, speeding back the way we came. No one spoke for a few seconds. We were all in complete shock. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. We agreed to return to the original road and take the highway, no matter how bad the traffic was. Anything was better than staying in those streets. I don't know what would have happened if our doors weren't locked that night, but I do know one thing. If we had hesitated even a second longer, we might not have made it out.